Very good afternoon, everybody. Welcome again to another special episode of Friday Drinks. It was threatening to rain today, and it was very cold. And I had my cardigan and everything, and then the weather just changed on me. But today is very special. We've got an ambassador. It's the first time we've actually had an ambassador on the show. Thank you very much, Ambassador Pete, for coming. How do we actually address you?
Just call me Pete.
Pete.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Oh, fantastic. So,
It's
Pete,
Friday.
thank you very much for joining us, eh?
Thank you.
And for agreeing to do this. That's very brave of
I don't know
you.
what I signed up for yet, but
Yeah. I'm looking forward to this, eh? I
Because
think we've
neither
got.
Tinashe or I can be described as diplomats by any stretch of the imagination. We're both highly disagreeable.
okay, I'm in the middle of it.
Yeah, but I'm looking forward to this because we've got a number of nibbling questions that we have, and certainly the public and the people that follow the show. But thank you very much for doing this, and let's see how far it goes. But before we go anywhere, he's a proper diplomat. He came bearing gifts.
I did. I'm sorry, Tinashe, but I don't think it's for you, though. I'm sorry, I didn't realise it's for you. But,
Yeah.
but for Rufaro,
It happens all the time.
I'm very sorry, but I have to correct that. But I bought a nice island whiskey, Talisker, from home, from Scotland. I live in Scotland.
Fantastic.
And you
fantastic.
probably know Talisker well, but it's a beautiful one.
Oh, yeah,
Have
absolutely.
you ever been to Skye?
No.
It's the most beautiful
It's on my
island
bucket list.
on the west coast of Scotland, and right on the sea with the mountains behind it. And so I think you can taste the salt and the mountain air as you drink it. So
Yeah,
there you
fantastic.
go.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Wasn't that
particular one-
007?
I think he was a Talisker man. Yeah.
He was,
I'm
right?
just playing to my British stereotypes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is phenomenal. It's sweet and it's peaty, and
It's
according
not
to my,
so peaty. It's not like the real island ones, like far out onto the Outer Hebrides. It's a bit less, bit peaty, but I think it's still.
Yeah, it's superb. We've actually had it on the show.
Have you? Okay.
And it's one of my favorite ones. So thank you so much for that. And
Yeah.
Tinashe told me that you were going to, because you're a diplomat teetotal on the show. But I figured I'd tempt you with a really interesting a bottle from the most colourful whiskey club in the world called the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. And they have a tradition of these outrageous names. So this one's called Gorgonzola's Burning. And Gorgonzola is a
Cheese.
Italian blue cheese,
Yeah.
and it's just pungent and rich with flavor. And and that's basically what they're saying about this. And it's aged 13. It's got a 13 years age statement. It's been aged in 2 different casks. So it should be quite interesting. And hopefully, as the show goes on, you might be tempted to try a shot.
Let's hope so.
I'm trying to be teetotal because partly because I need to keep my wits about me with you two, but partly because I'm doing this ridiculous race training. I'll come on to, but I'm sure I could try a wee dram.
Absolutely, you should.
Yeah. And you decided to have a Malawi Shandy.
Yes, please.
Why?
Because I think I've only ever had it in Zimbabwe. Never had it anywhere else in the world. Never had it in Malawi, and I guess it's got the classic Mazoe in it. Which is obviously any Zimbabwean you meet anywhere in the world, particularly when you meet a Zimbabwean outside of Zimbabwe, they talk so fondly of Mazoe. So it's a classic.
All right, I'm looking forward to what you think and how you rate mine, because I reckon I make the best Malawi Shandy in the world.
Okay.
Because elsewhere it's called a rock shandy, but we have the Mazoe crunch, and that I think turns it into
Which is
something
iconic,
sweet.
yeah.
So it's sweeter than a rock shandy, but I think you'll enjoy mine.
And I have memories of when I lived in Zimbabwe as a youngster, as a rural teacher. Mazoe was the thing that kept the borehole water, which is quite brackish and quite salty, but the Mazoe made it taste
Smoother. And I'm actually going to add something what that we call in the southern parts of Africa, we call it a concoction. But in Kenya, because we do have an audience in Kenya, they call it a dawa. So if you go to Kenya and you
But in
ask,
Kenya they put vodka in it.
yeah, they do. So mine, obviously, it's without the vodka, but I think it's necessary, especially when, the change in weather. And it's something that I think I will make as we go on. But as we start the show, maybe we can just start by just tell us a little bit about yourself for our particular audience.
Great. I'm a diplomat. I've been in Zimbabwe now for just over a year. I came in September last year, This is my second ambassador job. I haven't always been a diplomat. I started my career, I think I've said this in other places, but I started my career in Zimbabwe as a teacher in rural school up in Mudzi. And then my career has sort of shifted around and moved and done different things at different times, but found my way back here to Zimbabwe as British ambassador. I've got 2 kids. Sadly, they're at school in Scotland. Well, good for them, but sad for me that they're at school in Scotland. But they come out for holidays and half terms, and my wife is here with me in Harare. But yeah, very happy to be here.
And what's the thing that you love most about Zimbabwe?
Gosh, there's so much. I think
just one thing, because I'm going to ask you another thing that you hate.
Oh,
you know? So think about it carefully.
Think about it. No, I think Zimbabwe is beautiful in so many ways in terms of, and it's a cliche, but sort of the physical geography is stunning, and the people that I've met and the kind of the hospitality is just second to none. So that's 2 things, isn't it? But I got 2 in one.
Yeah.
Both
and what you hate the most?
Gosh, I'm a diplomat. I'm going to say what I hate the most.
It's Friday.
I don't know whether there's anything I hate about Zimbabwe. I don't think I can. I think my job is I'm going to be a diplomat and give you a diplomatic answer. But I have to be positive, because otherwise I have to be positive about Zimbabwe, because I think that's what my job is. And I think that's what Zimbabwe and what the UK needs of me, to be a positive and constructive. So I think, we may come to talk about this. I think sometimes being the British ambassador can come with a lot of legacy, a lot of history to it. So that I find difficult, but that's part of the our role in Britain's role in Zimbabwe over the last 100+ years always comes back onto me somehow. So that's difficult, but it's part of the challenge.
Okay, you want to try this and then tell me? Yeah, look at the colours.
Look at the colour. It looks perfect. How the separation's there.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
All right, great. Okay, so that's the pass I needed, because now we get to the hard questions. And we're going to start with some of the really difficult questions, because I think that's what the audience wants to hear. And so it's around sanctions. Yeah,
straight in.
Yeah. You introduced sanctions in 2000, I believe, and then over time those have evolved. And then the last was in 2023, where you had 4 individuals. Oh, no, it's 2019, just after the elections, when we had, and then we have 4 individuals that are on the sanctions. Are sanctions working or not?
There are 4, it's important to kind of just clarify, there are, as you said, there are 4, actually plus 1, 5 individuals that have sanctions against them. And that means that those 5 individuals can't travel to the UK and can't have a bank account in the UK. That's basically what it means. Okay. There's 1 entity as well. The challenge is that often the story is told is that the entire country is beholden to those 5 people not being able to travel to the UK or have a bank account. So it is, but it's clear that those 5 people can't, and that was a direct result, as you say, of the of some of the post-election violence in 2018, 2019, and I think that that's a clear signal about for those individuals. But what keeps getting replayed, if you go onto our, and I think people it is quite confusing, and I think people, if we were to go onto our website and read the legislation, it's very clear that it's just about those 5 people. Not about the rest of the country.
So is it working?
Is it working in the sense of a signal?
So it's a signal, or what is it? Is it a deterrent? Why are they on sanctions? Because if it's just 4 people, the cynical in me is just take them off. I mean, doesn't make any difference. It's just 4 individuals. And if those 4 individuals want to travel to the UK, you just decline their visa. If they want to open a bank account, you just diplomatically decline the bank accounts or whatever it is that you guys do. But in terms of sending a message to the Zimbabweans, then it's no longer, the propaganda around sanctions then goes away, because it's just 4 individuals. Yeah,
the propaganda, it's very hard to kind of win that story. I think most of my job at the moment is focused on this is a legislation passed by the British government in say 2019. Most of my effort is demonstrating that they don't have any impact on Zimbabwe as an economy. And that actually Zimbabwe can continue to trade with Britain, and there's nothing to get in the way of that at all. So that's how I spend my time, demonstrating every day, and we can talk about more every day, that our trade is increasing, that there were 5 ministers in Birmingham 2 weeks ago. You can travel between, and we can do things, and we can partner together between Britain and Zimbabwe, and we'll keep doing that. I think it's been an important part of our foreign policy to have a sanctions mechanism that is able to signal where there are particular in this case, human rights abuses or corruption abuses that actually we want to make a clear policy that those people can't come to the UK and can't. And maybe there are other ways to do it, but I think that's part of British government foreign policy.
Because if I can
step in a little bit, I want to think about it more philosophically, right? Which is, not necessarily specific to the British Zimbabwe scenario, but just generally, if you think about the modern history of sanctions, right? Whether it's the American sanctions against Cuba, for example. When you look at the sanctioning power, the outcome that they're looking for typically is a change in behavior, right? Or they're saying, look, we didn't like this particular event or action, and we want to punish it so that it stops, and going forward, there's a change. And typically, no matter when you analyze most sanctions regimes that have ever been in place anywhere in the world, they don't get the desired outcome. And the people in the jurisdiction that is affected, where the individuals who are sanctioned live, actually suffer more than the individuals who are sanctioned. So, and there's a long history of this. So at that level, at a very philosophical level, do you have confidence that you'll get the outcomes that you're looking for with sanctions regimes?
Well, I push back on the bit that the people of the country suffer in any way, because they don't. There is nothing, find me an impact from UK sanctions on 5 individuals that affects an ordinary person on the streets.
So it's a perception thing. So it's not something direct. It's kind of like, there'll be a banker sitting in London looking at a transaction with a Zimbabwean entity, and they're probably, and they're busy people in a very competitive, busy market, right? They don't have the time to get into the weeds of exactly how the mechanics work, right? Yeah. And they probably heard somebody mention a Zimbabwean sanctioned entity at some point in time, and they just think to themselves, you know what? This
I don't want the headache.
Yeah, I can do this transaction in Zimbabwe, or I can do it in Zambia, and I'm not really sure that Zimbabwe is kosher, so I'm just going to focus on the Zambians. And I think that indirectly, a lot of transactions just don't happen because the guy sitting in London isn't interested in learning all the details.
I don't. So I speak to lots of businesses in London and across the UK when I'm back and from here. I don't think that's. I mean, if it's true to say that if you were to sit in the UK and you were to go onto your phone and Google Zimbabwe sanctions, you would be met with an entire slew of articles written by Zimbabwean newspapers talking about how Zimbabwe's under sanctions and how Zimbabwe's been destroyed by sanctions. And I admit, if you see all those articles from Zimbabwean newspapers, you're going to say, hey, maybe that's. Wow, why should I do that? But that's because of the way that the Zimbabwean media has described the sanctions regime, which is frustrating because it's false. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not true at all. So actually, that's the own goal is that the Zimbabwean media continues to tell the story that Zimbabweans as a whole and Zimbabwe is somehow under sanctions, when actually it's just 5 people. Mm-hmm. And when I go to the UK and I meet companies and talk to them, they don't talk about sanctions being their problem. They talk about, well, how am I going to get my currency out? How am I going to rule of law, property rights. Oh, I remember that story of the land tenure from the 2000s. That's the stuff that people talk about, not necessarily, this country's under sanctions.
Okay. So just following up on that, there's something that you picked up and you said, well, sanctions haven't stopped trade. But the data's telling us something else. And, and I put a caveat that correlation does not make causation. But in 2018, the combined trade between Zimbabwe and the UK was £569 million. In 2023, the trade is now 269 or 250. So that's, it's gone off by about 50% or more.
That's not the figure I have. My figure is that it's 609 million now. So we could just check whether that's...
Yeah, so I'm using actually your data. This is the UK government data. And I can show you, yeah?
Both way, trades, two-way trade.
Yeah, two-way trade. So this is the data that was presented in the charts above. Value of total trade in 2018 was 524. Mm-hmm. And then in 2023, it was 269.
That's value of total trade over exports and inputs. Okay, well, I don't recognise that table. What I mean, we can come back and check this, but my understanding is that trade is nowhere near what it was in the 90s, and obviously that's something we're trying to increase. But it's increased to 609 million 23-24. That last year when we went to ZITF, the figures were 60. It had increased 67%. Of course, the caveat there's a bit of a COVID depression there, but it had increased year on year, and actually. We want to continue to increase it, so we've expanded our trade team. We're actively pushing more trade. So my figures, I don't know where that came from, but
anyway, we can always fact check. That's what our audience are very good at. And please, let's get the actual results. But these I got from a UK website, a government website.
So there's perception around trade between the West and Africa and China. In Africa, and that the Chinese are much more engaged. They're much less fussy and sanctimonious about doing business with us, in this part of the world, and that and I want to underline that I'm saying it's a perception, right?
Sure.
I think it might not necessarily be borne out by the data and the people actually doing transactions. That China is seen as a better partner in some respects than the West in general, and you can obviously speak for the UK. Well, what do you make of that perception? And do you think there's, it's backed up by the data? And what would you, it's just a function of the Chinese doing a better job just selling the way they're trading with us?
Well, I think first thing to say is that Zimbabwe has sort of freedom to trade with whoever it wants, right? And so if it wants to trade with the UK, it can. It wants to trade with other countries in Europe or around the world, it can. And it's not for me to say it should or shouldn't. And of course, there are countries, and that's not for me to kind of criticise individual countries in this kind of forum. But what I do think is that, and yes, our trade is definitely. Our trade flows have decreased since the 90s for sure. Although I think they're coming back up, but we'll check. But I think what was focusing for us is that I think that when Zimbabweans and Zimbabwe government and Zimbabweans make choices about who to trade with, I think that European, British companies and American companies, others around the world, offer a set of standards that I think are good for Zimbabwe. So I think the sort of corporate offer from British companies, where they bring in kind of high quality standards. They're really good on environmental, social governance. If you're listed on the London Stock Exchange, you've got the registration. It's not sanctimonious. It's about you've got rules and about how you invest. And so when you invest in a project, you think about local people and how local people get jobs. You think about local benefits and how you create value in the economy. You think about the environmental impact. So when I've gone and seen a mining company listed on the UK Stock Exchange, and you see, look, I can see there's local people here driving, being trained to drive the diggers, and there's and the way the kind of the community engagement's been done well and properly. That for me is what I think is what Zimbabwe wants. When I listen to what the president says and what the government says about wanting investment, it's always about how do we create local benefits, how do we create a value addition in country. So I would say that, if a Zimbabwean's making a choice about who it wants to trade with, I think the offer that a British company has is a good one. And it may not be in the same volume, but it's definitely not sanctimonious. It's definitely not kind of, this is about good stuff that people want. And I would kind of wholeheartedly say that's, and every time I go to see a company, or even I was down in one of the big mines, and go and speak to community members, and they're saying this is great. We're getting companies coming here, and it's building infrastructure for us, and it's making sure there's schools and all the things. So yeah, I think that's what I would, if I were Zimbabweans, that's what I'd be choosing. Because I'm not. So,
so again, on quality of trade, and it's interesting that you talk about beneficiation and things like that. But when we look at the trade between Zimbabwe and UK, we get worried, and I'll tell you why. Well, personally, I get worried. Goods that are imported from the UK, it's vehicles, so cars, just the top 5. And when you look at specialized machinery, because ideally that's what you want, what we import, and this is 2024 data, we've only imported about 1.9 million worth of special machinery, right? But when you look at cars, second-hand cars, and I combine that with road vehicles, which is cars again, second-hand, third-hand, whatever, we're looking at close to 22 million. This is just in Q2 of 2024. And then when you look at what we are actually exporting to the UK, it's great. Vegetables, metal, ore, and scrap metal, and then coffee, tea, jewelry.
Skills are in the data that you're looking at.
No, skills are actually
a lot
not.
Of human beings.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, skills are not. But just from a trade perspective and the quality of trade, you find that we're using a lot of our resources to import cars from the UK. So we become a dumping ground. I mean, that's how anyone will look at it, that the UK, once they're done with their cars, then where do we dump them? Well, let's dump them in some little country in Africa.
I mean, that presumably is a Zimbabwean choice, right? I mean, you're free marketeers, and believing me, people want to buy things, whatever they want to buy from the UK, that's to control that. I mean, that's not a UK dumping policy.
No, absolutely. That was tongue-in-cheek. But what I meant is, as an ambassador, shouldn't we be promoting, capital goods? How could we get more capital machinery? Because that's actually what we need in Zimbabwe, and less the cars.
I mean, Britain's I'm not an economist, but my understanding is Britain is quite a service-driven economy.
Okay.
We don't have quite the same manufacturing bases that we used to have, but certainly, and I think some of our machinery is kind of high-end, quite expensive, and I imagine many countries and economies choose not to buy from Zimbabwe, from the UK, when you can buy from South Africa or from further afield. But I agree, we need to be focused on the quality of trade, and I think those service sectors. So we've got, where the services come both ways, and it's important that we recognise trade as a two-way. So we've got companies coming in and investing in maybe not the scale, but investing in health infrastructure here. So a big company is building 30 or so district clinics and hospitals around the country for the government. Those are the kind of things those are better quality ones. Where you're bringing both money, but you're also bringing kind of skill sets to invest in infrastructure, for example. And I think it's taken quite a long time to rebuild. It will take time to rebuild that. We've just had a big, in July, we had our international investment arm invested in NMB Bank, so bringing capital in, and that's the first time for many years.
That's good. Yeah, it's good.
So put 10 million in, and it's a relatively small amount to begin with, but I'm talking to the CEO yesterday that's all been dispersed out to farmers to buy machinery, to build kind of, put sort of on-farm renewables.
So capital.
So that's all kind of, that's finding those examples, and for me, in many ways, amplifying those examples and telling the story and saying, look, you can come in here, you can invest, it is profitable. That's what Zimbabwe needs and wants. You're right, whether that's better, and ultimately, we want to encourage Zimbabweans to invest in the UK too. So there's Nyiradzo has invested and is set up in the UK. That's a good example. I like talking about it because it's a good service for not only Zimbabweans, but for other Africans who use Nyiradzo services in the UK.
Okay. So we'll talk about skilled labor later on. I just want to deal with the hard issues. At the beginning. And don't worry, I'll make you another one. So the other thing is around farmer compensation. And I want to start off by just giving a preamble on where we are at the moment and why it's a cause for concern, and then what do we need to do. And you're the right person to talk about this. So just before the elections last year, we had the elections in August 2023. But AFDB had the annual general meeting in Abuja, in Nigeria, in July 2023. and the Zimbabwean issue, farmer compensation, came up. Specifically, debt resolution, but farmer compensation came out. And here I'm just dealing with what came out of those meetings, and then also our conversations with the farmers. Two things came out. The first one is that the Americans, and this is public information, that the Americans were not keen at all. That's the first thing. The second thing is the British are not willing to compensate as far as the land is concerned, because I think that the farmers know that they can't get compensated as far as the land is concerned with the government of Zimbabwe, but the idea was to take it to the British. I don't know why they have that claim, if they have a claim at all, but the idea is the British are supposed to play a diplomatic role in ensuring that the Americans and the World Bank, IMF, everybody comes to play as far as the compensation of the farmers is concerned. But what came out of that meeting was extremely disconcerting, that there is no evidence to suggest that the Americans are going to move. And what I want to know, because then after that, and these are the newspaper journalist writings that we have, is they said we will monitor Zimbabwe post 2023, August 2023. It's a year after, and everything is quiet. Adesina hasn't been to Zimbabwe. Chisano hasn't been to Zimbabwe since then. And clearly that was a pivotal meeting. Everybody thought that we were heading somewhere. But it's been a year. We haven't had any meetings, and it doesn't look like we're going far. Was that meeting as pivotal as it sounds or as it looks from our perspective? So I know there are so many loaded questions in there, and I just want to hear your thoughts and feelings towards this.
There are lots of things in what you said, and we can unpack them. And I think at the starting point is to talk about that you're talking about is the AFDB-led process on arrears, which I think you're referring to, which is the President Adesina from the African Development Bank and President Chisano as the sort of as a regional facilitator, political facilitator, which is the how do we move forward to restructure Zimbabwe's debt. Remember, Zimbabwe has $21 billion of debt, about 12 billion of that is international debt, owed to creditors like the UK, but also to international institutions like the World Bank and the African Development Bank and others. So the process you're talking about is, and we are 100% behind it. This is about, for me, this is the big game changer for Zimbabwe. If Zimbabwe could, it's not only that there is $12 billion worth of international debt, but that also means that Zimbabwe can't borrow from the international institutions. So it can't borrow from the World Bank or from African Development Bank at concessional rates. So, if you go to the African Development Bank, World Bank, you borrow at about 1%, 1.4, 2.4% over 38 years usually. So it's very good borrowing. And Zimbabwe hasn't had access to that since 1999.
That's true.
And where any other country in the region has access to that kind of money, which means that you can build your dams and your roads and your infrastructure, your health services, invest in capital for your farmers. All of that can come from those kind of institutions. So the reason why we're so keen to try to move forward on there's three tracks under that arrears process you're talking about. There's a governance track, a land track, and an economic track. And those three all have indicators the government set out that it wanted to, the reforms the government wanted to make. And so, what we want to do is all move forward on that so that then we can restructure or write off even that debt. That would then just be, and that would just be a complete, forget talking about sanctions, that would be a complete game changer. You're talking about that kind of money, and not only rewriting the debt, but also, but also the access to further concessional financing. Complete game changer for Zimbabwe. If you're anywhere else in the region, that's what you've got. Now there has been work at the sort of technical working group levels, but there haven't been in the last since the election. There hasn't been a high level meeting with President Chisano and Adesina coming, and I think there's been many plans for them to come, but it hasn't happened.
Is it because the Americans have poured water on it?
No, I don't think it is. I don't think it's to do with. It's true to say that the Americans paused their involvement for a while, but everything else has continued.
So are the Americans still engaged in this? Sorry,
well, you have to talk to the US ambassador for that. But I think ultimately, internationally, everybody sees there's a real benefit here, and everybody wants to move this forward. Because we can see how critical it is. If you could get how critical it could be for Zimbabwe, and that's in all of our interests.
So part of the
I have a question. That's related to what you were just saying that I think is interesting, which is, and I always have this fight with Tinashe about our debt as a country. Where his view is that there are a lot of political issues around the debt, and as long as those aren't resolved, we're never actually going to be able to restructure the debt. And, my view is that actually the reason why we have a debt challenge is because we're just profligate and delinquent with our creditors. And if we simply changed our behavior, we would be able to restructure our debt and raise money. I mean, $20 billion in the context of global capital markets is a drop in the ocean.
Yeah.
So you've got some sense for the economics of national debt and the creditors. And you obviously have some sense of just of the politics as well. If you were going to take a view between Tinashe and I on this subject, is it just simple economics? If we behave better as a debtor and are seen to pay some of our creditors and make good on our finances, can we actually just restructure our debt without any change in the politics? Or actually, Tinashe's got a valid point, and there are some legitimate geopolitical issues that prevent us from restructuring our debt on a purely commercial basis.
I don't think there are any. I don't think there are any geopolitical reasons that are blocking it. I think technically everybody wants this to move forward. Everybody wants, because it's in no one's interest to have Zimbabwe not able to access that kind of funding. If you had on your show, if you had the World Bank or African Development Bank, they would love to be able to reinvest concessional finance in Zimbabwe. And there's conversations we often have at the board. We're a board member. They would love to be able to. But obviously, if you haven't paid, or if your debts haven't been...
if you're delinquent.
Since 1999.
How do you lend a delinquent?
Why would, if I go to my bank and say, look, I owe you $1,000, but I haven't paid anything for 20 years... Why would my bank give me money? So that's what we need to try to... But there is real political will internationally to be able to move forward on this, because actually Zimbabwe currently has to go and borrow money from private markets at 25%, when it could be borrowing money at 1.5 over 38 years, which is kind of concessional almost. There's very good money, and then Zimbabwe gets to build its roads and its dams and the stuff it needs to do with cheap finance, and that's what happens all around the region, and it's just not happening. So I mean, I kind of think it's a technical thing, it's a technical solution, and we, as the UK, we have some bilateral debt. We would be very happy to restructure, even write off that debt alongside it, but we have to do globally. We have to do this as part of a kind of global process, because obviously what you can't do is have one country then write off its debt and then find another country lends more. And actually, so you need this, and this is the challenge we all face. Debt is a massive problem for, particularly in the region, and Africa is across, but for Zimbabwe so much so it's such a big issue. So the kind of things that the politics comes in the sense that the government set out, and I before my time, but set out these 3 tracks and said that these are linked to the national development strategy. These are things we're going to achieve, and these are the milestones that we're going to make. And when we make those milestones, we move forward together. And I think the key challenge is, we can talk, but there's bits of progress in places, but it hasn't been enough to get everybody around the table for the next phase. Now, I think what we understand from the African Development Bank is that there are plans to have the next high-level dialogue meeting in November, later this month. We would absolutely, as the UK, be chomping at the bit to have that, because we think it's really important to kind of move forward the conversation. So I think there's a bit of politics in it too, but I don't think it's geopolitics. It's about does Zimbabwe want to move forward on this and clear the debt, restructure the debt? Because I think the international community, we spend a lot of time as the international, myself and my colleagues, trying to work out how can we, with the Ministry of Finance, how can we move this forward? How can we get this to...
So if I get you correctly, you're saying that the Adesina Chisano debt restructuring, human rights have got nothing to do with it?
Well, there are governance indicators.
Because,
there are 3 tracks.
Exactly.
So there's a land track, as your first starting question, come back to. There's a land track which so that we're not a co-chair of any of these, but there's a sort of government of Zimbabwe and an international co-chair of each of these tracks. Bits of the pillars. There's a land one, there's a governance one, there's an economics one.
Yeah.
And what we need to see, and how it's all been framed, is we want to see progress across it. They don't all have to be at the same time, but progress across those three tracks of work. So you started talking about land. Obviously, the global compensation deed that was announced in 2020, the President, His Excellency's State of the Nation address last month, even a couple of weeks ago, the kind of announcement of a new land policy. Those are, there's some really important things in there about land tenure, about land bankable deeds, title deeds, etc. All of which is contained in the land track. So that's all positive stuff. In the economics one, there's moving on to a staff monitor program, SNP, to the IMF, which we've obviously been through before, but good. But obviously, I think putting a new currency in slowed that down a bit. So important, but I think important. When the government wants to, they can ask for an SNP whenever they want. So when the government wants that to move forward, which needs kind of transparency, there's basic metrics in there, and then there's a governance one, and there are 16 indicators in the governance track. Where there's a working group that meet and look across those, and they get external people come in and look at it and say how we're doing on civic space, on governance, so basic governance indicators. So they all matter.
Okay.
But what we want to do is, and as I say to colleagues in government, is that we just need to see collectively, want to be able to look at those positives and the signals, because then we can all move forward. And you've got to build trust and move forward together.
I suppose the question is around this, that when you go to your bank manager and you're asking for a loan, they don't ask your domestic affairs whether you're beating your wife or not. Sorry to be so...
Well, they do know your... Well... Maybe they should. I'm not sure it's the analogy I want to go down in response to government of Zimbabwe. But you do get asked questions about know your customer. You do need to know, you want to know that your customer has sustainable...
but they don't want to know how I'm treating my animals, or what we are considering the third pillar, which is around governance. I understand it from a global perspective why that governance is there, but I guess the argument is this is not really a debtor-creditor relationship.
I think there's a fair critique, and I can sort of understand that perspective. My understanding of the process is that actually government proposed these 16 indicators.
So it was government of Zimbabwe itself.
It proposed the three tracks, and now there's a partnership between government and international community. But my understanding is that came out of the National Development Strategy, and these three sets of things are things that government wants to do.
So you're saying the government of Zimbabwe put up the three pillars and said, this is what we want to be judged on, and these are the issues we are going to correct, and they included governance issues.
That's my understanding. Yeah.
Okay. This did not come from the Western nations.
From the Paris Club.
Well, the Paris Club. That's a pure creditor-debtor relationship, right? And then you had Africa, because this only came about because of Adesina and Chisano. And in the preamble, or the 5 pages that Chisano wrote, and Adesina also wrote to this, is they were hammering on Zim has been a bad debtor, which is true. But then they also talked about the governance issues, that these are human rights issues and we need to address them. Now, what I'm getting from you is actually Zimbabwe itself came up with this and said, this is the plan and this is what we're going to do.
Well, my understanding is that, I don't know whether who said what first, but my understanding is that this came up through kind of joint conversations of what was needed. And it's linked to the National Development Strategy, the NDS1. So it was consistent. It was designed to be consistent with government policy.
Okay.
But I think it's a fair critique, but I guess it's sort of from a kind of international perspective, a belief that that it's good to have those in there, because actually some of those elements lead to a more inclusive economies, inclusive society. Some of the governance indicators are about inclusion, and actually that means the sort of evidence being that makes a stronger economy if it's inclusive. So that where there's space for civil society, there's space for etc. So whether you could, I think it's a fair challenge to ask that. I think that and as part of why we've said it doesn't all have to happen at the same time. What we want to see is, if you can see progress on the land one or progress on the economics one, that gives everyone confidence to move forward together, and ultimately, the judgments get made along the way. But what we would really want to do is, we'd really want to be able to see the international institutions being able to lend again to Zimbabwe, because that's the kind of game changer.
How much influence does the British have as far as the Americans are concerned? Because, we are hoping that the Americans will also come and share their view. But, they've got Zidera, and they've got veto power as far as the World Bank is concerned. And so far, I mean, they've...
Never been enacted, never been used, though.
Okay, all right.
So I can't talk about a US government policy. You have to ask the American ambassador about that. But what I can say is that we're a board member on all these institutions. So we have a board seat on the World Bank, on IMF, and we're an investor in the African Development Bank through a constituency. And we absolutely want those institutions to be able to lend again at concessional rates to Zimbabwe. There is Zidera, you're right, Zidera is right. It's not a veto, and it has never been enacted. So ultimately, when those institutions are able to sort of at the board level, be able to say, look, we've got confidence here that we can invest concessional finance back in Zimbabwe, the UK board will be absolutely
interested. Okay. So, and then we look at private capital, because it's a nice way to say, if public international capital is difficult, maybe private capital could bridge in the gap. And we had huge organizations that were in Zimbabwe since
more than 100 years.
100 years. So
BP, Barclays.
Yeah, BP and Shell. A lot of these companies are, we grew up thinking they were part and parcel of Zimbabwe and Zimbabwean culture, and employed lots of people.
Yeah.
And these have
left.
left.
My salary from Standard Chartered in Motoko, I remember.
And so them leaving was extremely symbolic. And I remember when the BA left, because we used to travel to the UK, and the BA was there, and it was a 10-hour flight. You got in the morning, and by 4 o'clock,
now you have to have, if you're lucky, you have one stop. If you're not lucky, you have 2 or 3.
Yeah. And that's a very lucrative.
And then you got to go to Scotland if it's me. Yeah, no.
And that's a very lucrative route. So a lot of it was, from an investment perspective, these companies leaving says a lot. It's not really about the dollar value, but it's them leaving because there were institutions in Zimbabwe, right? They were part and parcel of the moral fabric and the business fabric.
Are you moralizing?
Well,
that's very unlike you.
Well, yeah.
Seriously?
Because it took, Stanchard leaving for a lot of people was, it's like a parent dying.
Oh my gosh, that is so dramatic.
It says a lot. And I suppose from a diplomatic perspective, because I want to move away from the business, but did you have an exit interview with a lot of these companies, or has the trade mission here in Zimbabwe, have they had, exit interviews? Sit down with Stanchard, sit down with BP, sit down with BA, and ask, why did you guys leave Zimbabwe when you were part and parcel of the fabric of this particular society, when your impact was huge? It wasn't about, I know Barclays employed, more than 1,000 people. BP and Shell, again, you're talking about more than 10,000 people that were employed by UK investors, and them leaving. We know what that happens. We know exactly the problems that accrue. So have you had an exit interview? Have you tried to understand why these companies left Zimbabwe?
I mean, most of this happened before my time, but we have spoken to companies. We speak to British companies all the time to understand whether they want to enter the market or leave the market. I mean, I guess I'm not an economist, but free market economics. People, companies make choices. We don't tell companies what to do, where to invest, where to stay, where to go. They make their choices based on their understanding of the political and economic business landscape. So, I've spent a lot of time. I've spoken to British Airways a number of times because I could probably retire if we got British Airways to restart direct flight. But actually, for them, it's a profit question. It's just that they don't believe. I mean, we dispute this, but they don't believe that there's enough passenger numbers to make a profitable route for them from Zimbabwe direct to the UK, because their business model is about business class seats, not economy seats.
Oh, right.
So that's what their business model actually has moved since those days. I remember flying home on BA or even on Air Zimbabwe, 9-hour flight straight home. They don't now. Their business model shifted. They make their money through their business class cabin, so they're flying out of Joburg or Nairobi, and they're filling their business class. They don't believe they have the same numbers here. Now we keep showing them the figures, and we talk to the airports authority here and saying, look, we think the number of people, because there is the data to final destinations of where people are going, and so we're interested because we think it would be a good part of a sort of living bridge between Britain and Zimbabwe. But also, actually, pure logistics is that Heathrow is absolutely full, so they'd have to bump off one flight to put on his in-flight. So for them, there's good business reasons why they have not come back. And we will continue to engage with them and talk to them.
So give us 2 or 3 reasons.
I want to push back a little bit because I think you were overly melodramatic about why all these companies left. I don't think it was. I don't think there's any conspiracy or any mystery. It's just pure economics and business. These guys were here for a long time. They understood the market better than most, and it was too hard. So I'll give you a classic example, right? When by the time Stanchart sold and exited in Zimbabwe, they had closed all their branches, and they just had a branch in Harare and Bulawayo, right? Just next door, in Zambia, they had branches all over the place that were open from 8 in the morning until 8 p.m. They were open on Saturday and Sunday, right? And it just tells you, right, that the guy who's looking at sub-Saharan Africa in charge of Stanchart is saying, Zambia's great business. This is too hard. And they exited. And I think, if we're honest from a Zimbabwean perspective, we've just made it incredibly difficult for these businesses to operate profitably here. And they just left. And
I'm going to push back on that. And I'm going to use Stanchart as a very good example, Stanchart and Barclays. And as a banker, the critical thing is it wasn't what Stanchart was doing as far as the commercial enterprise is concerned. It's not the banking in Zimbabwe, but it's the correspondence banking. So if somebody is transferring money from Hong Kong or anywhere in the world to Zimbabwe, and the correspondent bank was Stanchart, it meant something. And Stanchart was making money from that. In fact, I think a lot of the trades that were happening in Zimbabwe were now happening through Stanchart, because that's the only correspondent with a name, a formidable name that was still out there internationally. And that on its own going away makes it very difficult.
But it didn't go away. That's why FBC bought it, because they said, look, that relationship is going to continue.
No, not that I have anything against FBC, but if you're transferring money from China or anywhere and you see correspondent bank, FBC is not going to be using Stanchart. It's going to be using some funny name. and it's just not the same. Correspondent banking, that's what Barclays and Stanchart, and that's why I was taking a lot of the businesses that are in Zimbabwe, and here I'm actually on your side, that a lot of the businesses that are in Zimbabwe, it's really not for profit. It's impact. It's businesses that have been part of.
Western businesses or
Western
Chinese businesses here?
I think Western. I think the Chinese businesses, we still have the Buccaneer. We don't have the top branded names coming out of China. But if you talk about Barclays, that's a British institution. If you talk about BP and Shell, and a lot of them were here, and the impact, which is some sort of goodwill, was beyond just the profit that they were making. Yeah. It was also because when internationally, if people knew or if people know that Stanchart is in Zimbabwe, they might actually, on the back of that, trade with Zimbabwe. Just purely knowing that Stanchart is in Zimbabwe and my money is in Stanchart. And I think that with the Chinese, and this is where Zimbabwe has to do a lot of work, is Zimbabwe wants to get big name brands from China. Then you need the top Chinese banks in Zimbabwe. Because once you do that, a Chinese investor, once they know that my money is with XY bank that I trust, that I know, then I know my money
Well,
is
you know
safe.
who the biggest shareholder in Stanbic is?
Well, it's now the Chinese.
So they have that.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's kind of easy to get kind of nostalgic about some of these big firms. I guess things have changed in the global. I mean, I'm not an economist, but I think things have also evolved in the kind of global, I guess, post-global financial crisis, and how institutions need to govern themselves. And my understanding, without getting to individual institutions, is that if you're some of those big big organisations that have to have very clear compliance and sort of standards that you operate everywhere, every country in the world, that it's been quite hard or difficult for those companies to follow those policies in Zimbabwe with the kind of currency instability, how to invest if you've got excess profit, where to invest it, how to get it out, all those kind of things. So then you start voting with your feet, because actually it's difficult. Whereas actually when we speak to kind of smaller UK companies, sort of, they tend to, and they come or they get to Zimbabwe, we bring them to Zimbabwe and they come and they can see the opportunities. They actually can be really positive, but they've got a high risk appetite. They don't have a big corporate board that's in sort of enacting a single...
Tinashe would describe them as buccaneers.
No, I don't think buccaneers.
No, that's the truth.
No, I think they don't have a massive board that has fixed standards. It means you have to do everything the same in every country. So they can come in, they can be a bit more agile, they can look at the economy, they can think about how they're going to work. Hopefully, and I think if they're a British company, they're doing it properly because they get regulated in the UK. Yeah. So I think there is a difference between those. But I mean, we would all love to see some of those big institutions here.
Okay, so then something that is interesting, the way if you're looking at it from a political perspective, it's fascinating and interesting, because 100 years ago it was the British coming to Zimbabwe, and now it's the Zimbabweans going to the UK. And the numbers are staggering. If you look at 2023, it was something like 17,000 Zimbabweans went into the healthcare sector in the UK. So thanks to Brexit, that has opened up a lot more opportunities for Zimbabweans. And thanks to the British government for allowing Zimbabweans, because clearly there's a skill set that we have. Would you like to just expand on that? And what are your thoughts on Zimbabweans actually living and going to do work in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, Zimbabweans make a hugely important contribution to the UK, to the sort of fabric of our society and culture. I think we're really proud and better for it as the UK. So I think we really value the work that they do, and some of it is the health sector we can talk about, but there's also all sorts of sectors that people get involved in. And I've been trying in the last year to profile some of those. So I do a nascent podcast where I try and interview Zimbabweans in the UK. Myself and Capitalk, we do a kind of monthly radio show. So we try.
Oh, nice.
And the idea is, there's a rocket scientist in Bangor, or a fashion designer in Doncaster, or a Formula One engineer in London, and just trying to tell the story that there are Zimbabweans making a really great contribution to the British economy and British society, for which we're really grateful and proud.
How well integrated are they when they get to the UK?
I don't know, to be honest. I mean, when I've been in the UK, I've been to meet people, and I think people inevitably try to. But I think my understanding is integrated. I think inevitably people think, oh, I've got a friend in Leicester, so that's where they head to first, or because you've got connections, or maybe you support a football team. I don't know, whatever makes you choose your area. So you do find communities and people. We see that a lot in terms of people looking for a community. Where can I find mealie meal? Where can I find Mazoe? Obviously a key thing for Zimbabweans in the UK. So there's definitely going to be a bit about that. But I think people, I hope, and I think Britain is. We have challenges, but I think we benefit from being a diverse, multi-ethnic, multiracial country, and I think we're proud of that, and I think we're proud of the integration. You talk a bit about the health sector, obviously that's a big part. I think we see there's been about 80,000 since 2020 who've gone to UK on health and social care visas, and they play a really crucial role in our health sector. Again, and that's not easy work. We really value it. I don't know whether we have an accurate number of the number of Zimbabweans in Britain, but for me, as a British ambassador, that's a great part of our connection with sort of Britain and Zimbabwe. And it was always traditionally seen as British people in Zimbabwe, but actually it's it's both ways. And what I think is really fascinating is then when you find someone who's gone to the UK, who's become British because they've been there for 5 years, they've got their nationality, they've got a British passport, but they're Zimbabwean heritage, and they're Zimbabwean heritage, and then they come back to Zimbabwe as a Brit. And suddenly there are...
And you're representing them.
Another embassy representing them. So that's great. I mean, for me, that's a part of a kind of global, multicultural, diverse UK, and they're part of our partnership between the two countries.
Fantastic. The other thing, when you look at the UK remittances that are coming from Zimbabweans that are living in the UK, I think it's second to South Africa.
Yeah, second
but,
highest,
but the amounts are huge amounts, and a lot of
28% of 3 billion. I mean,
it's a huge amount. What could the UK government, what could they do to help? So I know that there are issues around the fees that are charged, and I don't know what else you could do, or what else are you doing
in terms of money transfers?
Money transfers, and just encouraging the remittances and ensuring that they get to the recipients and it's safe in Zimbabwe.
Yeah, I don't know the I actually don't know the answer to that. It'd be interesting if people have ideas about whether there is something we should do. I guess we sort of see it as a private sector, it's a private to private relationship. So we don't try and, there are big companies doing money transfers. We don't necessarily, as a government, intervene in that market. And so the market drives it, and you've got big companies, which you probably know better than I do. I haven't heard of challenges. Often you hear, I haven't heard of challenges.
Zimbabwe it's one of the highest. So I think to transfer money, you're looking at 5 to 10%, which is one of the highest in the world. Yeah. I think India, from the UK to India, it's now 1% or less than 1%.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'd be interested whether you or viewers have views as to what is there something that that a government should do to intervene there? Because how would we subsidise that?
Well,
how do you reduce the cost of that?
I'm an free market capitalist, and I
can tell you where
a simple explanation to why it's much more expensive to remit money to Zimbabwe than India. It's just harder, right? The risks are higher, the costs are higher,
right?
And
actually, that's not true. It's a very simple. It's just that there's an oligopoly that controls that particular market, and I think that what can you do? You do have a private sector. You do have a private equity entity, and I think it still operates in Zimbabwe and still invests in companies. And there are a lot of these startups that are around that ecosystem, fintech ecosystem, and that's something that you could do directly. Just fund anything that has to do with remittances and making it easier and simpler.
It's such an important part, and for families across the country here, getting remittances from South Africa or from the UK is such an important part of the economy. Interesting. I don't know whether there's. It's worth looking at. Yeah, it's worth looking at. But there's a free market.
It brings up an interesting segue, which is something that is topical, and I think the person who, there's this debate and discussion around aid from Western countries to poorer countries, like countries in this part of the world, and from where you're sitting, where do you sit in that debate in terms of the efficacy of aid? There's this on the one end of the spectrum, there's a strong argument that aid does more harm than good, because the country receiving the handout has an incentive not to reform, not to get better, to continue getting these handouts, and that we're much better off having purely commercial third-party interactions.
Okay. Big metaphysical now, aren't we? There are arguments for and against international aid. We believe, as a British government, there is a role for international aid. We just announced, I had a budget this week, and we just announced next year we'll spend £18 billion globally on international development assistance, official development assistance. And that's part of our moral obligation, as part of supporting countries around the world. There is a place for that. And there's a place.
But does it work? Does it get the outcomes that you guys are looking for?
I spent most of my career in the sort of development sector before becoming more of a diplomat, and I think you've seen some fantastic things that we do when we do them well. And for me, that's about kind of precision investments of grant money, that where you can make there isn't necessarily you can either kickstart an innovation, or where you can take a risk that private capital wouldn't make. Or you can protect the most poor, the most vulnerable as a starting point. There is a risk, of course, if you just pour it in, you create a sort of dependency and you disincentivize governments to then do it themselves. And we mustn't fall into that trap. And that part of The challenge, I guess, for all of international donors has been how do you make sure that you do the former and not the latter? Because if you start subsidising government, then you've got it wrong. But actually, you know, I was a couple of weeks ago, well, a month ago, I was in Chipinge, you know, right Hakwata, right on the Mozambique.
That's where the producer comes from.
Oh, okay. So tell me about it. But you know, right in the middle, right far from anywhere, long way from the.
So the ambassador is saying you come from the middle of nowhere.
No. I loved being there. But you know, a long way from the Zeta lines.
Yeah.
And to get power to that community would be so expensive. So actually, if you can insert a subsidy into that actually builds, you know, we built a mini grid with the Rural Electrification Board, with partners building a mini grid that community then can get power. That attracts in community, you know, that attracts people in. People come, you know, we met people who'd gone to South Africa for work, come home, and realise they can actually set up their shop in Hakwata. They come back into their village. They've been able to set up welders and small scale businesses, and you start to create a kind of positive cycle of investment. That was a targeted piece of investment which wasn't going to, you couldn't necessarily do on a commercial basis. And I think that's a good use of international development money, one that we should be really proud of. Or similarly, we've got some similar work going up in Bingo again, where you can kind of, where they are, it is expensive to get to, but if you can build a bit of you can make it quite precise, or you're, you know, right now in an El Nino year with the drought challenges, if you can provide some subsidies to support organisations that might not necessarily be able to do it directly, then you get benefit for the most vulnerable. So if you can use your aid money to target, well, you know, best as possible to target the most vulnerable, to work with governments to make sure that you are incentivising government ownership and take over a bit, but you're saying, well, we'll bring a subsidy in first, and so that might be like a kind of social protection scheme that actually government's not going to use its own risk its own capital on to begin with. It's got huge demands on the fiscus. You can say, look, let's come in and we'll prove it and we'll make it work and we'll test it. 3 years down the line, you start taking over this onto the government budget. Then I think you've got a really good use of aid money. If you, at the same time, you need to think about, as you say, for, you know, bringing in investment. So for us, you know, there's a sort of spectrum of most vulnerable, most poor, targeted risks, taking risks, and the other end is actually, you know, talking to getting investment, our finance institutions saying, can you, you know, pointing to people, they make decisions about bringing in, making it work for investors. I think that toolkit is a powerful one. There's always going to be critics of international development assistance, but I think, I think that there's enough evidence out there to say that you can have a real kind of real impact in economies if you do it well.
Talking about impact, I think something that we already talked about in terms of Zimbabweans living in the UK and then coming back, is the embassy doing anything for them? So when they come back, they're now British citizens and they're settling in Zimbabwe. Is the embassy engaging them? How can they help them to be fully integrated and to start businesses? Or
it's always an interesting question about the role of an embassy, because I think many people think that somehow we exist to serve our population, as in our passport holders. Many Brits, whether how long you've been British, think that, and I constantly get sort of people coming up to me saying, "But I'm British, you know, you should be." Well, and actually, you don't pay taxes in the UK. You know, you're not actually, you know. So we don't provide a service to British people. Okay. On a sort of ongoing basis. The main reason we would provide a service to British people in Zimbabwe is if there was a major crisis, if there was a natural disaster, or something that meant that we had to look after our citizens, or, you know, in the worst case in Sudan, where there was an all-out war, we actually ended up evacuating our citizens, those who wanted to go. So that's a kind of consular service, or if someone gets arrested. We would never intervene with them. You know, if they've broken the law, they've broken the law. It doesn't matter what where they are. But we would go and visit them in prison, and we would they've lost their passport. We would make sure that So it's more that kind of protecting them in a sort of looking after them if something goes wrong. Many Brits think that's not what they want. They want much more. They want us to kind of, you know, escort them around the country. But we wouldn't necessarily, any British, wherever you come from. And it's the same with the Zimbabwean embassy in London. Isn't going to be looking out for every Zimbabwean and saying, you know, we're here to help you invest. We're here to help you. Ultimately, it's doing passports, visas, and a bit of consular work.
Okay. And Zimbabweans traveling to the UK. So outside of the skilled labor, why are they traveling? Why are they going to the UK? Is it tourism? Is it business? From your experiences?
What I find every day amazing about Zimbabwe is just the amount of connections between Britain and Zimbabwe. You know, you can't, I don't know about in this room, but it's everybody, it's not everywhere you go to a group of 10 people and someone will have a brother in the UK or a sister in the UK or someone or a grandmother used to work there or they lived there as a child or they moved, you know, there's so many connections between the countries. And I think that's something like we should be, you know, I think it's kind of unique. Whatever we can say about geopolitics and what's happening in the world, the sort of uniqueness of the relationship between British people and Zimbabwean people at a kind of human to human level is very different from anywhere else. Whether it be, I don't know what football team you guys, but whether it be supporting football teams or...
we can't say it online.
You used to support us now.
I can't say I'm in Ipswich Town, and I can't say there's many Zimbabweans who support Ipswich Town because I don't think we have many Zimbabweans in Ipswich. And actually, when I first came to Zimbabwe, everyone supported Liverpool. Then I came back and everyone supported Man U, and it changes through the eras. Maybe in a few years, every Zimbabwean will support Ipswich. No, so I think there's a kind of connect the people stuff. So people go to see their families, people go and connect. There's students. I think there were 12,500. I think last year 12,500 Zimbabweans studying in the UK. University, either undergrad or postgrad, so there's lots doing that, which is great. So we want to continue to promote because we think we've got a good offer and there's good universities.
All right. And how do you see the relationship evolving over time between the UK and Zimbabwe?
Well, I hope, my job, this is my job, it depends on how successful. My job is to build a relationship and recognise that it's been tough over the years. You know better than I do how tough over the last 20 so years. And maybe a bit longer, but I hope that we are building a positive, constructive relationship between the two countries, but at a government-to-government level and a people-people level. One of respect, one of partnership, where we are tackling, we are genuinely working on mutual interests. And so a lot of what I spend my time talking about is how do we support growth in Zimbabwe and in the UK, because that's that's right in the middle of the Venn diagram between British and Zimbabwean interests to grow our economies. For the UK, that's absolutely critical. Our budget this week is all about growth. It could be, but equally there are challenges that we face that are no longer national challenges. Climate change is not you can't solve it in Zimbabwe and you can't solve it in Britain. Can we collaborate on things that matter to us all? So. That kind of mature relationship, that partnership, there we treat each other with respect at a government-to-government level, but also, and for our new Foreign Secretary.
Yeah, I was about to get into that the change, I mean, we've had 14 years of the Conservative government, and the relationship between Zimbabwe and the Conservative government is usually different from the relationship between Labour and the government. Are we likely to see any change in policy?
It's funny how people always say that. It's a common theme because there was a particularly bad part of our our collective history that happened to have one government. So I think the thing to say is that 14 years of Labour being in opposition, we've got a new Labour government, and it's fascinating as a civil servant because we serve the government of the day, and on a Thursday it's one government, and then on a Friday it's the next, and that our job changes. It's inevitable that a new government is going to want to look at its entire everything, and it's going to have a different policy. It's been in opposition for 14 years. It's going to want to have a different view on things. But it's important to say that this government is very different from the Labour government of the 2000s, because I think it's very easy to jump to, So maybe help us as a Zimbabwean audience. So what this government, I think really critical is in terms of its foreign policy globally, so not just Zimbabwe, is that, and David Lammy, our Foreign Secretary, I think he's I don't know if you've sort of seen him talk, but he's very clear in the sense that he is himself a descendant of slaves. He talks about it, that he's a sort of descendant of the Windrush generation. He's a black man from Tottenham, and he wants to treat our foreign policy in a completely different way. He wants to build a relationship of equals. He wants less. He talks about less more partnership, less paternalism, less telling, more listening. All these kind of these catchphrases about us just being prepared to kind of engage in a different way around the world. He feels that for too long the British government has sort of wagged its finger and told countries what it should do and what he wants to do. And I think this is what's the epitome of British government foreign policy, is that we're not here to tell people and to tell Zimbabweans what to do. We're here to find the ways to work in partnership, and I think that's personally really refreshing to have a Labour government coming in and saying, they've been in opposition for 14 years, but they've also had lots of time to think about what they want to do and how they want to frame it, and they've come out with a really strong agenda.
So what should we anticipate no change or slight changes, or
I think we should anticipate a continued concerted effort to build a productive relationship between Zimbabwe at a people-to-people level.
Okay.
We talked about the Brits and Zimbabweans in Britain, but at a government-to-government level, we're having that real positive, constructive partnership.
So Commonwealth, for example, will Zimbabwe be admitted?
I mean, Zimbabwe, Commonwealth's a fantastic I think Commonwealth's a fantastic organisation.
Yeah.
2.4 billion people, 18 trillion economy. I think that
scholarships.
There's massive opportunities.
But is it? I'm going to be a devil's advocate. What is the value to a country like Zimbabwe? To be a member of the Commonwealth.
Well, I think, it's for Zimbabwe for Zimbabwe, not for me, but I think there's a huge advantage to being part of the Commonwealth, because you're part of that huge diverse group of countries around the world. It's no longer kind of former colonies. There's Mozambique and Rwanda who are in the Commonwealth now, others too. So there's a more shared countries that have a shared sort of value and vision to tackle the things that matter to them, whether that be climate change or whether that be global issues together. I think there's a sort of government to government level they share values and sort of democratic process and direction, but also from a people perspective, scholarships, huge number of Commonwealth scholarships, exchanges. I can't remember, but we were looking at the other day the sort of number
and
of
even visa just moving around.
Yeah. Recruitment. In terms of access into those countries. If working in moving to Canada, Australia, the UK, India, big economies in the Commonwealth. But and that if you're a lawyer, the legal exchanges, so lots of things that I think open up, and
even peer review. If you go through an election, and it's peer reviewed by the Commonwealth Secretariat, I think it means a lot. It carries a lot of weight.
I think you're both speaking to great and noble aspirations, right? But in reality, as we speak today, Zimbabwe is a member of SADC. It's mostly a talk show. We're a member of the AU. It's mostly a talk show. There's this new organization called BRICS. They get together and they have these speeches and they talk about how they're going to change the world order and do all these amazing things. It's talk. But people, but there are costs associated with this talk, right? People actually get onto planes and book into hotels and spend a bunch of money to just talk. And there's just there's no outcomes on the other side of it, right?
But isn't the world connected? And actually, this is for Zimbabwe would be a fantastic opportunity to connect in a new way with a different set of countries, in the Caribbean, to the Canadian, to the Australia, India, in a way that, and actually, yes, I think there is something. There's money behind it. There's trade connections. There's business opportunities. Tourism opportunities.
No, I hear you.
It's not a lot of cost to be part of. I think there's a real merit to that. Of course, this is all hypothetical if Zimbabwe were to be readmitted. But I think there are advantages. I think that, and it's for the Commonwealth. And we've just had a new Secretary General nominated last week before. So the Ghanaian Foreign Minister. So I think again that's sort of the shape of the future of the Commonwealth, led by a Ghanaian Secretary General. I think is going to be interesting.
So Rufaro, maybe you might understand this. I think to me it's social signaling. So if you're not part of a group, there's the consequences of being part of a particular group. And if you are, then it's like, okay, you're one of us.
Oh, you're one of the cool kids.
You're one of the cool kids.
But the world, we can't deal with anything on our own anymore. So I don't think any country can deal with the challenges we face. The global challenges are such that things we couldn't even imagine even 5-10 years ago. That actually being part of productive groups of shared interests, I think is a positive thing, because actually we can achieve things together on climate and etc.
Yeah, and I would motivate that there is absolutely no harm in joining BRICS. If we're being honest,
BRICS or Commonwealth?
BRICS, Commonwealth, any of these cool kids clubs.
But it exposes it. But all of those. I don't have any. I think that if they can provide a way of exchanging ideas, of exchanging of technology, of skills. What's
I can't help myself, but I have to talk about. I have to push back on BRICS.
No. Let me first make the case for BRICS, and then you can push back. When Jim Collins came up with
Jim O'Neill
came up with then it was BRIC, not BRICS.
Yeah. South Africa. I mean, it's a small.
I think that was a token. Sorry, we're undiplomatic. So.
Please.
But you have to be.
It was the DEI admission.
But you have to give credence that there was a lot of capital that went into BRICS post that acronym becoming a reality.
That
over the last 15, 20 years, a lot of capital, a lot of investments, portfolio investments. Because remember, a lot of the portfolio managers, they don't read a lot. All they see is BRICS.
Which is why they underperform the S&P 500.
Yeah, but that's real money coming into South Africa. That's real money going into China, right? And I think that if you're part of the Commonwealth, again, the Commonwealth Games. Imagine if the Commonwealth Games.
Yeah, the Commonwealth is different. I think
from the Commonwealth. Yeah. No. To me, they're all part of. Remember when we were in high school? There was no limit to the number of clubs you belonged. In fact, the more clubs you belonged, the better.
Cooler you were.
Exactly. But that's my take on it. That the Commonwealth Games, participating in the Commonwealth Games, is huge. And why wouldn't you want to be part of that?
So okay, I'm gonna focus on BRICS just for a minute, because I think this is a pet peeve of mine. This is just complete. So if you think about how the acronym came about, it was Jim O'Neill wearing his hat as chairman of Goldman Sachs in 2001, and he's thinking as an investment banker, as a capital allocator, where is there going to be growth? Where is the alpha, right? Which of the economies? And he recognized Brazil, Russia, India, and China as these significantly big emerging markets that were enjoying double-digit growth. That, in his mind, everyone allocating capital on the global stage needs to pay attention to and needs to find alpha in, right? So, they make sense as a grouping purely from an investment capital allocation standpoint, right? Now, when they had their first conference in 2009, right? And it was, surprise, the inaugural conference was in Russia. The aspiration or the idea was to challenge the so-called dominance.
So, for the producer is saying you're yapping a lot.
Couldn't comment.
So the point is, maybe Ambassador Pete, can you make the case for Zimbabwe joining the Commonwealth? Why it's necessary for Zimbabwe to join the Commonwealth?
Well, we've talked about the benefits. The case needs to be made by the Secretary General, so currently Baroness Scotland, and then what happens is the 56 countries. If the process is that she then makes a recommendation to 56 countries, and it's a consensus-based organisation. So that's what would. But I think there's a strong case. But we'd obviously want to see what the Secretary General's recommendation.
And post Brexit, the UK, what are its thoughts, and how does it, when you look at the geopolitics in the world and what's happening, how do you see the UK interests and going? I mean, 100 years ago, you were a colonial powerhouse, and now that has fundamentally changed.
Yeah, we're a small country just off the top left of Europe, and we need to recognise our role in the world. Obviously, we've got a long history, and to say sometimes difficult through some of very difficult through the colonial period. But I think the kind of advantage that, without getting into our own propaganda, but I think the advantage is that we're now able to define the relationships in the world on our own in the way that we want to, and I think that's a really good, as a diplomat, being able to define our relationship in Africa or anywhere else in the world. That's a real positive. So we've got freedom to do it.
This has been fantastic and great, and thank you very much for doing this. You are very brave. Well done.
You're the first diplomat on the show.
We're not diplomatic at all.
I felt a bit kind of pensive at times, but no, it's good to have you. It's good to be here.
But this is fantastic. Maybe last words or anything you want to address directly to our audience and to Zimbabwe?
No, other than just to say, Rufaro and Tinashe, thank you very much for having me. It's been good to spend a Friday and have this conversation. So thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, we tend to yap a lot.
Which is why one of the things we always say on the show here is that the audience shouldn't take us too seriously because we don't really know what we're talking about. This is actually on the show today the man that is a subject matter expert who should be taken seriously. But me and Tinashe,
you sound like yourself. You sound like you're subject matter expert. So you do a good job.
We're just having a drink on a Friday.
You do a good job of faking it if you're not. But yeah, thanks.
But thank you so much. This was lovely.
Yeah.
We hope to see.
Cheers.
We hope to see you again.
Yeah.
I hope we've left enough room for you to come back and spar.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Everybody, thank you very much for this, your comments and your support. We thoroughly enjoy it, and I think this is something that you will also enjoy. Have yourself a wonderful Friday and a wonderful weekend. Ours is just starting. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.
Yeah.